The courtroom was already tense before the hearing even began. Reporters lined the back rows, legal assistants whispered over stacks of paperwork, and spectators leaned forward in anticipation. This wasn't an ordinary court case. The woman seated at the defense table was none other than Victoria Hale, wife of Governor Richard Hale, one of the most powerful men in the state. Victoria was known for her glamorous public appearances, expensive designer outfits, and a confidence that many admired, but others quietly called arrogance. That morning, she entered the courtroom like she was attending a private gala rather than a legal hearing. Her heels clicked loudly across the polished floor, and she wore an expression that suggested none of this really applied to her. At the bench sat Judge Fleisher, a woman with a reputation so sharp that even veteran attorneys measured every word in her courtroom. She wasn't interested in politics, status, or celebrity. Her courtroom had one rule: respect the law or face the consequences. Court is now in session, the bailiff announced. Everyone stood. Victoria rose slowly, glancing around the room with a faint smirk. Judge Fleischer adjusted her glasses and reviewed the case file. Mrs. Hale, you are here regarding allegations of interfering with a public official, contemptuous behavior toward law enforcement, and obstruction during an ongoing investigation. Victoria let out a soft chuckle. The sound was small, but in the silent courtroom, it landed like a dropped glass. Judge Fleischer looked up immediately. Is something amusing, Mrs. Hale? Victoria leaned back in her chair. No, Your Honor. I just find this entire thing a little excessive. A murmur rippled through the room. Judge Fleischer remained calm. This is a courtroom, not a press conference. I suggest you take these proceedings seriously. Victoria smiled wider, almost entertained. With all due respect, Judge, I'm sure this will all be cleared up shortly. Her attorney shifted uncomfortably. The prosecution began presenting evidence: body camera footage, witness statements, and reports from officers involved in the incident. According to the report, Victoria had attempted to intervene when police stopped a vehicle connected to a financial misconduct investigation. She allegedly demanded officers release the individual immediately, repeatedly citing her husband's office. As footage played on the monitor, the room watched Victoria speaking aggressively to officers. Do you know who I am? She said in the video. Several people exchanged looks. Judge Fleischer paused the footage. Mrs. Hale, is that your voice? Victoria shrugged. It sounds like me. A few spectators gasped. Judge Fleischer stared at her for a moment. Let me be clear. Sarcasm will not help you today. Victoria rolled her eyes slightly. That was when it happened. Judge Fleischer began reading a formal warning regarding courtroom conduct. Midway through, Victoria laughed, not a nervous laugh, not an accidental one, a loud, unmistakable laugh. It echoed across the room. For half a second, nobody moved. Then the atmosphere changed completely. Judge Fleischer slowly placed the document on the bench. Mrs. Hale, she said, voice measured and cold, did you just laugh during an active judicial warning? Victoria still had a grin on her face. I'm sorry, Judge, but this feels incredibly dramatic. Her attorney whispered urgently, Victoria, stop talking. Too late. Judge Fleischer pressed a button on her desk. Bailiff. The bailiff stepped forward instantly. Judge Fleischer looked directly at Victoria. You have now disrupted proceedings, displayed repeated contempt for this court, and ignored 2 formal warnings. Victoria's smile faded slightly. Stand up. Now the courtroom was completely silent. Victoria blinked. Excuse me? Stand up. She hesitated, then rose slowly. Judge Fleischer folded her hands. Mrs. Hale, no title, marriage, or political connection places you above courtroom procedure. Victoria crossed her arms. Surely we can handle this without theatrics. That sentence sealed it. Judge Fleischer turned to the bailiff. Mrs. Hale is in direct contempt of court. She is to be taken into custody immediately. Gasps filled the room. A reporter dropped a pen. Victoria's face turned pale. You can't be serious. Judge Fleischer didn't flinch. I've never been more serious. The bailiff approached. Victoria stepped back. Wait a second. This is insane. Her attorney stood up. Your Honor, perhaps we can request a recess. Denied. The bailiff reached for Victoria's wrists. This is ridiculous, she snapped, pulling away slightly. Judge Fleisher glanced at the clock. 45 seconds, she said calmly. That may be a courtroom record. A few people in the gallery covered their mouths in disbelief. Victoria looked around as if expecting someone to intervene. Nobody did. Not the attorneys, not the staff, not even the reporters, who were too busy documenting every second. Call my husband, Victoria demanded. Judge Fleisher replied instantly. You may use standard procedure after processing. The words hit harder than anything else. For the first time that morning, Victoria looked genuinely shaken. The bailiff secured her hands behind her back and guided her toward the side exit. As she passed the spectators, the same woman who had entered with supreme confidence now wore an expression of stunned disbelief. The courtroom doors shut behind her. Silence. Then Judge Fleischer adjusted the next file. Moving on. The simplicity of those two words somehow made the entire moment even more brutal. Within an hour, clips from the hearing flooded social media. News headlines exploded. Governor's wife arrested in courtroom after mocking judge. Comment sections filled instantly. Many viewers praised Judge Fleischer for treating a high-profile defendant exactly like anyone else. One viral comment read, "Money buys lawyers, not immunity." Another said, "This is the first time I've seen real consequences happen in real time." Outside the courthouse, reporters gathered in chaos. Governor Richard Hale arrived later that afternoon, flanked by security and advisors. He refused to answer most questions, but one reporter managed to ask, "Governor, do you believe your wife was treated unfairly?" He paused, then gave a careful answer. "The judicial system must be respected." That quote made headlines too. Meanwhile, inside holding, Victoria reportedly asked multiple times when she would be released. But contempt charges aren't handled through impatience. She remained in custody pending review. By evening, legal analysts were already discussing the incident on television. One former prosecutor commented, "Judge Fleischer did exactly what judges are expected to do: maintain order. If ordinary citizens face contempt for disruptive behavior, high-profile individuals cannot receive a different standard." Another added, "The mistake wasn't the laugh. It was assuming the laugh carried no consequences." That line circulated online for days. The next morning, Victoria returned to court wearing a plain detention uniform beneath a neutral coat. Gone were the designer accessories, the confident posture, and the amused smile. This time, when Judge Fleischer entered, Victoria stood immediately. No hesitation, no expression. Judge Fleischer glanced briefly in her direction. "Mrs. Hale, do you understand why you were held in contempt?" Victoria nodded. "Yes, Your Honor." "Speak clearly for the record." "Yes, Your Honor, I understand." Judge Fleischer leaned forward slightly. "And do you now understand that courtroom rules apply equally to every person present?" A pause. "Yes." It was probably the shortest sentence Victoria had spoken in 2 days, and the most important. Judge Fleischer reviewed a few notes. "Given your acknowledgement and restored conduct, the court will release you from contempt custody with a formal citation and financial penalty." Victoria exhaled, but Judge Fleischer wasn't done. "Let this serve as a reminder," she said, addressing the room. "Respect for legal institutions is not optional. Confidence is not immunity. Status is not a substitute for discipline." Even the reporters stopped typing for a moment. Those words would later be quoted everywhere. Victoria was released later that day, but the incident followed her far beyond the courthouse. Late-night hosts joked about it. Commentators debated privilege and accountability. Political analysts speculated whether the scandal would affect the governor's public image. But the most replayed clip remained simple: Victoria laughing. Judge Fleischer looking up, and 45 seconds later, everything changing. Weeks later, in a televised interview, Judge Fleischer was asked whether she knew the decision would go viral. Her response was classic Fleischer. I wasn't thinking about headlines, she said. I was thinking about order. That clip became viral too, because in an era where many people assumed influence could bend rules, one courtroom had delivered a very public correction, not through shouting, not through spectacle, just procedure, cold, efficient, and impossible to ignore. The public loved it because it wasn't just about one governor's wife. It symbolized something larger, a reminder that consequences can arrive faster than confidence expects, and that sometimes the shortest journey from arrogance to reality is 45 seconds.